Part 1. Rick James. Rick James ruled the stage with absolute command. Sequins, leather, high boots, and a stare that dared the audience to look away. He did not walk onto a stage. He invaded it. Every movement was sharp, sexual, and aggressive. Funk was not just music for him. It was dominance. He controlled the band, the rhythm, the crowd, and the night. To the public, he was excess made brilliant. The king of punk funk. Untouchable. Unstoppable. That persona did not come from nowhere. James Ambrose Johnson grew up restless, confrontational, and allergic to authority. Discipline never sat well with him. He drifted early, clashed often, and learned to survive through force of personality. Music became both escape and weapon. He absorbed soul, rock, street rhythm, and rebellion into one sound. Even before fame, there was a hunger to push limits and refuse restraint. The same instinct that fueled creativity also planted the seeds of chaos. Success arrived fast and hard. Record sales exploded. Radio embraced him. Clubs wanted him. Money flowed without friction. With fame came an environment that rewarded extremes. The parties never ended. Boundaries dissolved. Cocaine became routine. At first it felt functional. Energy increased. Confidence sharpened. Long nights became possible. The studio felt electric. The drug seemed to serve the music. No alarms sounded. No brakes were applied. The shift came quietly. Powder stopped delivering the same effect. Control began to slip. Crack entered the picture and changed everything. The drug did not extend energy. It devoured it. Paranoia replaced confidence. Suspicion replaced pleasure. The mind turned inward and hostile. Sleep vanished. Trust collapsed. Every room felt threatening. Every interaction felt loaded. The men who once orchestrated sound now reacted to imagined danger. Behavior followed the mental collapse. Friends described mood swings without warning. Laughter turned to rage. Charm flipped into intimidation. People around him learned to stay quiet, to avoid eye contact, to leave early. His home became a closed environment ruled by fear and unpredictability. The public still saw the star. Behind closed doors, the atmosphere was unstable and dangerous. The breaking point arrived when control was fully gone. During an extended drug binge, a young woman was brought into his home under false pretenses. Accusations spiraled. Delusions hardened into certainty. What followed was not a misunderstanding or a moment of anger. It was prolonged abuse driven by paranoia and dominance. The victim escaped and went directly to authorities. Medical reports confirmed severe harm. The story shocked even an industry accustomed to excess. Released on bail, there was still no pause. No clarity. No retreat. Weeks later, another woman found herself trapped in a similar situation. The pattern repeated. Control. Fear. Violence. Escape. Police intervention. The myth of the outrageous rock star collapsed into something far darker. Headlines shifted. Interviews stopped. The narrative changed from genius to danger. In court, the image could not save him. Fame offered no shield. Testimony described a man consumed by addiction and delusion. The defense attempted denial, confusion, and minimization. Evidence overwhelmed reputation. Injury spoke louder than records sold. The courtroom stripped away costume and legend. What remained was accountability. The sentence marked a complete reversal of status. Prison removed everything that had defined him. No stage. No audience. No authority. Just routine and confinement. The king of funk became an inmate. Inside, sobriety was enforced. Reflection was unavoidable. For the first time in years, the noise stopped. After release, he spoke publicly about addiction and regret. He acknowledged harm without theatrics. There was no full redemption arc, only damage control. Music resurfaced briefly through samples and appearances. Laughter returned through comedy sketches that turned his past into a catchphrase. The line became famous. The pain behind it remained unresolved. Health declined. Substance struggles continued. The body carried the cost of years without limits. When he died, toxicology reports confirmed a life that never fully escaped its demons. The music endured. The crimes did not disappear. Two truths existed side by side: cultural influence and irreversible harm. Rick James left behind a catalog that shaped funk and pop for generations. He also left a cautionary record of what happens when power meets addiction without restraint. His legacy is split down the middle. Soundtrack to celebration on one side. Permanent damage on the other. If you believe artistic genius should never excuse personal collapse, say it out loud below. And as this story fades, the next one reveals a very different image hiding a similarly dark descent. Part 2, Boy George. Boy George entered popular culture as something entirely new. His appearance blurred lines without threatening them. Makeup, hats, soft colors, and playful confidence created an image that felt bold yet strangely safe. Parents were curious rather than alarmed. Television embraced him. Magazines celebrated him. He looked rebellious, but he sounded gentle. His voice carried warmth, vulnerability, and emotional clarity. In an era hungry for color, he became a symbol of freedom that felt friendly, not dangerous. That image required constant maintenance. Fame arrived at a speed that left no room to slow down. Every interview, every photograph, every public movement became part of a carefully balanced performance. Expectations hardened quickly. He was supposed to be witty but harmless, provocative but comforting, different but never frightening. The pressure to remain that version of himself grew heavier with each success. Privacy disappeared. Silence became suspicious. Vulnerability became a risk. Behind the scenes, control slipped quietly. Heroin did not announce itself loudly. It entered as relief. A way to soften anxiety. A way to quiet the noise of constant attention. At first, it stayed hidden. Appearances remained polished. Performances continued. The public image stayed intact. Addiction worked in shadows, not headlines. As dependence deepened, maintaining the illusion became harder. Missed commitments raised questions. Physical changes sparked rumors. British tabloids sensed weakness and closed in. The press did not investigate gently. It hunted. Every stumble was magnified. Every private struggle became public spectacle. Addiction was no longer just a personal collapse. It became entertainment. Attempts to recover unfolded under surveillance. Rehab was reported as scandal. Relapse became confirmation of failure. The media framed the story as downfall rather than illness. Each headline reinforced shame. Each photograph stripped away dignity. The weight of scrutiny fed the very behavior it condemned. Years passed in cycles of recovery and regression. Music continued in fragments. Reinvention became survival. For a time, it appeared that stability had returned. Creative projects resurfaced. Public appearances grew steadier. The narrative shifted toward resilience. The past seemed distant, contained. Then a single incident shattered that fragile balance. A male model accused Boy George of being held against his will inside a London apartment. The claim described fear, restraint, and humiliation. Police arrived. Physical evidence supported confinement. The story exploded across headlines instantly. The contrast was brutal. The once gentle icon now stood accused of something deeply unsettling. Boy George denied wrongdoing. His defense described the encounter as consensual, misinterpreted, and manipulated. He argued that he was being targeted for money and attention. The prosecution painted a different picture. They emphasized power imbalance, isolation, and intimidation. Addiction history was presented as context, not excuse. The courtroom became a stage where two versions of the same man competed for credibility. The jury believed the prosecution. The verdict landed with finality. A prison sentence followed. Cameras captured the moment the pop icon was led away. Makeup gone. Costume absent. Expression unreadable. The image marked a permanent fracture between past and present. The harmless rebel of the 80s no longer existed. Prison stripped away performance. Inside, there was no audience to charm, no image to curate. The experience was brief but transformative. Upon release, the world felt different. Public sympathy was cautious. Forgiveness was conditional. The stain of conviction did not fade. Career rebuilding followed, but never from the same ground. Music returned. Appearances resumed. Fans remained loyal. Yet the story could not be rewritten. Interviews always circled back. The incident became a permanent chapter. No reinvention could remove it. Boy George learned to live with contradiction. Cultural icon and convicted figure. Survivor and offender. The public image regained color, but never innocence. His story became a reminder that fame can delay consequences, but it cannot erase them. Some see a man who fell and stood back up. Others see a warning about power, secrecy, and addiction. Both interpretations exist because the truth sits uncomfortably between them. Where you place that line says as much about the listener as it does about him. And as this chapter closes, the next story reveals a star whose collapse was slower, quieter, and just as devastating. Part 3, George Michael. George Michael presented control as an art form. Every note sounded measured. Every movement appeared deliberate. His voice was smooth, restrained, and confident, carrying intimacy without chaos. The public image was precision. Stylish but not reckless. Emotional but not unstable. He seemed to master fame rather than be swallowed by it. Privacy was his shield. Distance was his defense. That balance relied on emotional discipline that slowly eroded. Personal loss arrived in succession and left deep marks. The death of his first great love cut through his sense of safety. The later loss of his mother removed the final anchor. Grief did not explode outward. It settled inward and stayed. Depression followed quietly, persistent and heavy, hidden behind professionalism and silence. Relief came through substances that promised calm rather than escape. Cannabis softened anxiety. Prescription medication dulled panic. The choices did not match the stereotype of excess. They matched exhaustion. Nights grew longer. Sleep became irregular. The line between coping and dependence blurred gradually, without spectacle. Public incidents began to puncture the illusion. A car stopped in the wrong place. Another night behind the wheel when judgment failed. Each event felt small in isolation. Together they formed a pattern. Media attention sharpened. Headlines shifted tone. Concern replaced admiration. The narrative of control started to crack. Driving became the visible symptom. Reports described confusion, disorientation, and poor decisions rather than aggression. No pursuit of danger. No appetite for chaos. Just a man moving through the city without clarity. Each stop by authorities added pressure. Each court appearance chipped away at dignity. The story was no longer about music. The defining moment arrived late at night on a quiet street. A sudden crash shattered storefront glass and silence. The image of a luxury vehicle embedded in a shop window spread instantly. The contrast was stark. Sophistication reduced to wreckage. Questions followed immediately. How did it happen? What was in his system? How long had this been building? Medical tests confirmed impairment. The court listened without indulgence. Prior warnings mattered. Past incidents weighed heavily. The judge spoke directly about responsibility and risk. Fame offered no exemption. Charity and legacy were acknowledged but did not excuse behavior. A short prison sentence followed, unexpected for many, decisive in tone. Confinement stripped away distance. There were no assistants. No private rooms. No controlled exits. The experience was brief but jarring. He later described it as humiliating and clarifying. Shame replaced denial. Reflection replaced avoidance. For the first time in years, he confronted the pattern without filters. Release brought freedom without relief. The damage was already public. Trust had been weakened. Health remained fragile. Attempts at recovery continued, sincere but uneven. He spoke more openly about mental health and dependence. The tone was honest, without performance. Yet the weight of exposure lingered. The image that returned was softer and more vulnerable. Performances carried restraint. Interviews avoided bravado. Fans listened with empathy. Critics listened with caution. The illusion of invulnerability was gone, replaced by something more human and less stable. George Michael never lost respect for his artistry, but he lost the distance that once protected him. His story shifted from mastery to struggle. From control to consequence. The prison sentence did not define his career, but it marked the moment when silence stopped working. Some see the episode as accountability. Others see it as a warning about untreated grief. Both readings coexist because the truth is layered. Success hid pain. Privacy delayed intervention. Substances filled gaps that widened over time. His legacy now includes vulnerability alongside brilliance. The music remains timeless. The image remains complicated. The cost of control became visible only when it failed. Where responsibility ends and compassion begins is not an easy line to draw here, and different listeners will place it in different places. And as this story fades, the next chapter turns to an artist whose downfall played out loudly, repeatedly, and without pause. Part 4, Bobby Brown. Bobby Brown began as speed and charm packaged for television. A teenage idol with sharp footwork, an easy smile, and a voice that carried swagger without threat. He stepped out of a polished group image and into solo fame with confidence that felt natural rather than rehearsed. The music was bright. The energy was playful. Audiences saw a star who looked born for attention. That image shifted as success multiplied. Independence brought freedom without structure. The sound grew harder. The persona leaned into defiance. What once felt youthful now felt confrontational. Cocaine and alcohol entered the routine early, framed as celebration rather than escape. Nights blurred. Discipline thinned. The line between performance and private behavior dissolved. Marriage amplified everything. Joining lives with Whitney Houston created the most watched relationship in pop music. Two global stars under constant surveillance. Applause followed them everywhere. So did pressure. Addiction did not soften inside that spotlight. It intensified. Substance use became mutual, then competitive, then corrosive. Arguments became public knowledge. Trust eroded. The fairy tale cracked under repetition. Police reports replaced chart talk. Arrests accumulated. Driving incidents surfaced across states. Each stop by authorities added another layer to a growing file. The pattern was consistent. Substance use. Poor judgment. Violation. Brief custody. Release. Promise. Repeat. None of the incidents alone seemed career-ending. Together they reshaped his identity. Domestic disputes entered the narrative and hardened public perception. Courts addressed behavior without regard for status. Probation terms stacked up. Compliance required sobriety and structure he struggled to maintain. Missed requirements turned minor cases into custody time. Short sentences arrived frequently, not as dramatic punishment, but as consequence of inability to stop. The revolving door became the story. Jail stays measured in days or weeks interrupted attempts at stability. Each interruption stalled momentum. Tours were delayed. Opportunities passed quietly. Producers hesitated. Reliability mattered more than talent. The industry adjusted while he remained stuck. Public sympathy shifted to fatigue. Headlines repeated the same words. Mug shots replaced performance shots. The bad boy image stopped selling records and started selling caution. Fans remembered the music. They also remembered the chaos. Trust thinned. Loss deepened the spiral. Family tragedy followed addiction rather than ending it. Grief did not reset habits. It exposed how deeply entrenched they had become. Interviews grew reflective. Admissions became clearer. Accountability was spoken aloud, but recovery proved uneven. Talent never disappeared. The voice remained distinctive. The stage presence still flashed in moments. But consistency never returned long enough to reclaim the spotlight. The narrative stayed fixed. Trouble overshadowed craft. Noise drowned out melody. What defined Bobby Brown was not a single crime or sentence, but repetition. Small penalties multiplied into a long disruption. The justice system did not treat him as exceptional. It treated him as persistent. Each violation reinforced the last. The cycle fed itself. Attempts at sobriety surfaced periodically and sincerely. Support appeared. So did relapse. The public learned to wait for the next headline rather than the next song. That expectation became its own prison. The legacy sits uncomfortably between innovation and instability. A pioneer of sound whose personal life kept colliding with the law. A career measured not just by records sold, but by time lost to consequences that arrived again and again. Some hear his music and separate art from behavior. Others hear the silence between releases and think about what addiction costs over years rather than moments. The story resists a clean conclusion because the pattern never truly ended. Whether repeated chances are mercy or missed intervention depends on where you stand, and that question often says more about the listener than the artist. And as this chapter closes, the next story turns toward a figure whose self-destruction was romanticized until the law forced reality into the frame. Part 5, Pete Doherty. Pete Doherty emerged as a romantic projection before he was understood as a musician. Thin frame, distant gaze, and a voice that sounded older than his years. He wrote like someone quoting ghosts. The press framed him as a poet who happened to hold a guitar. London loved the idea. The image felt inherited, not manufactured. A troubled English artist walking willingly into myth. That myth quickly absorbed behavior that should have raised alarms. Dishevelment became authenticity. Missed rehearsals became temperament. Excess was reframed as inspiration. Addiction entered the story as aesthetic rather than illness. The narrative excused instability because it sounded beautiful when printed in columns. Doherty learned that chaos could be forgiven if it looked literary. Heroin and crack did not coexist with discipline. The drugs dismantled routine piece by piece. Timekeeping collapsed. Promises dissolved. Studio sessions stalled. Tours unraveled. What remained was intensity without structure. He wrote when he could. He showed up when he felt able. The band absorbed the damage until it could not. The collapse became personal when desperation crossed a line. During a period of separation from his bandmates, Doherty broke into the home of his closest collaborator. Instruments were taken. Equipment disappeared. The explanation was simple and devastating. Money for drugs mattered more than loyalty. The betrayal cut deeper than any missed show. Arrest followed. Court followed. The press arrived early and stayed late. Cameras captured confusion rather than defiance. The romantic narrative cracked under facts. The sentence marked his first real confrontation with consequence. Prison removed the myth and left the habit exposed. Confinement offered forced clarity, but not cure. Release did not restore order. It reset the cycle. Brief sobriety gave way to relapse. Fines stacked up. Probation terms tightened. Violations followed quickly. Each appearance in court carried less shock and more resignation. Judges spoke with patience that thinned over time. The law adjusted to repetition. Tabloids turned fascination into fixation. Every stumble became front-page material. Headlines reduced complexity to spectacle. Addiction was no longer hidden. It was monetized. Photographs followed him into alleys and courtrooms. Privacy vanished entirely. The coverage did not ask how to help. It asked how far he could fall. Relationships fractured under strain. Bands paused and resumed with caution. Projects started and stopped. Creativity survived in fragments. Songs appeared that hinted at what could have been. Consistency never lasted long enough to rebuild trust. Talent remained visible. Reliability did not. Additional arrests came for possession and related violations. Custody periods were short but frequent. Each stay interrupted momentum again. Each release promised change. Each relapse confirmed pattern. The system responded with escalating restraint rather than belief. Loss circled his orbit. Friends and collaborators struggled with similar demons. Deaths nearby added weight without altering behavior. Survival became accidental rather than intentional. Art continued as testimony rather than progress. Over time, the romantic frame lost power. The public grew tired of excuses. Sympathy turned conditional. The poet image felt less charming when paired with repetition. The conversation shifted from genius to waste. How much brilliance could be consumed before nothing remained? Doherty aged inside the same story. The face changed. The habits resisted. Periods of stability appeared and vanished. The press learned to wait. The audience learned to lower expectations. The music world learned to hedge. His legacy now reads like a cautionary footnote written in beautiful handwriting. A songwriter capable of rare lines who spent years fighting for the next hour. Addiction did not kill the talent outright. It rationed it. Piece by piece. Year by year. The tragedy lies not in one crime or sentence, but in attrition. Time lost. Trust burned. Potential thinned. The law did what it could. The myth did the rest. Whether the early praise protected him or doomed him is an open question, and answers tend to reveal the listener's own beliefs. And as this chapter closes, the next story turns to a figure whose authority and discipline shattered in a single, public night. Part 6, James Brown. James Brown embodied discipline as spectacle. Precision ruled everything. Bands rehearsed until exhaustion. Tempos were enforced like law. Fines followed mistakes. On stage, authority was absolute. The cape routine was not theater alone. It was command. Audiences witnessed control turned into rhythm, power turned into sound. He preached order, self-respect, and relentless work, and millions believed him because the results were undeniable. That authority had a shadow. Temper flared quickly. Loyalty was demanded rather than earned. Private conflicts mirrored public intensity. Stories circulated of volatility that rarely reached the spotlight. The image held because success reinforced it. As long as the music delivered, behavior was tolerated, explained away, or hidden. Substances entered late and quietly, framed as energy and relief. Over time, dependence hardened. PCP altered perception rather than mood. Paranoia replaced vigilance. Suspicion replaced leadership. The need to control intensified as judgment weakened. The men who once choreographed chaos now reacted to imagined threats. The rupture arrived during an ordinary day. A dispute at a nearby meeting escalated without warning. Brown appeared armed and agitated, convinced his space had been violated. Witnesses described confusion and fear. Authorities were called. Instead of de-escalation, flight followed. What began as a disturbance became a moving crisis. The chase crossed borders and stretched time. Police vehicles followed as Brown drove erratically, refusing to stop. Sirens echoed across jurisdictions. The image stunned the public. A legend in motion, not toward a stage, but away from consequence. When the pursuit ended, the spectacle dissolved into custody. Charges followed quickly and seriously. Weapons offenses. Assault-related counts. Failure to comply with law enforcement. Toxicology confirmed impairment. The defense argued altered mental state driven by substance use. The prosecution emphasized danger and recklessness. The courtroom became a referendum on accountability for icons. The verdict carried weight. Convictions stacked. A multi-year sentence was imposed. The hardest working man in show business was removed from the world he ruled. Handcuffs replaced microphones. Routine replaced improvisation. The myth cracked in plain view. Incarceration stripped away command. There were no bands to direct, no audiences to move. Time slowed. Programs replaced tours. Reflection replaced momentum. Reports suggested compliance and effort toward change. Sobriety arrived by force. Control was no longer optional. It was imposed. Release came with conditions and caution. Brown returned to music driven by habit and hunger. Performances resumed. Energy flickered. Authority never fully returned. The incident remained a fixed reference point. Interviews circled it. Audiences remembered it. The legend carried a visible fracture. The contrast became unavoidable. A man who preached discipline undone by loss of it. A leader overwhelmed by paranoia. The story complicated admiration. Influence remained immense. Innovation stood untouched. Yet the night of the chase reframed everything that followed. James Brown did not vanish after prison. He worked. He toured. He reclaimed portions of his place. But the image of control was permanently altered. The law had intervened where success once shielded him. The myth survived with a scar. History now holds two truths at once. The architect of funk reshaped music forever. The same figure endangered lives during a collapse fueled by substance and suspicion. Neither truth cancels the other. Together they define the legacy. Whether the sentence represented justice, tragedy, or both is a judgment listeners continue to wrestle with. And as this chapter closes, the next story turns to a frontman whose battle with addiction unfolded slowly, publicly, and without a single breaking night. Part 7, Scott Weiland. Scott Weiland stood at the center of grunge with a presence that felt both dangerous and refined. His voice could slide from velvet to rasp without warning. His body moved like it belonged to the song rather than the stage. He did not perform angst. He inhabited it. For a generation, his sound became a signature of alienation wrapped in melody. Heroin entered his life early and attached itself to the creative process. It was not marketed as rebellion. It was framed as focus, as relief, as fuel. Lyrics deepened. Moods darkened. The myth took hold that suffering sharpened art. That belief followed him everywhere. Addiction was no longer separate from identity. It became part of the brand others quietly protected. Success magnified the damage. Tours demanded consistency that addiction could not provide. Recording schedules collapsed. Commitments were missed. Arrests for possession arrived and multiplied. Each one carried conditions. Treatment was ordered. Probation was set. Expectations were clear. Compliance proved impossible to sustain. Violations followed predictably. Missed tests. Missed appointments. Relapse after brief clarity. Courts escalated responses. What began as warnings became confinement. He was placed into custodial treatment environments designed to interrupt the cycle. Structure replaced freedom. Recovery was attempted under supervision. Inside those walls, moments of hope appeared. Sobriety returned temporarily. Insight followed. Promises were made sincerely. Release arrived with optimism. Each return to music felt like a reset. Fans welcomed him back. The band waited again. Relapse never stayed far behind. The pull was relentless. Triggers returned instantly. Old patterns reasserted themselves. The same behaviors resurfaced. Another violation. Another intervention. Another separation from the band. Stone Temple Pilots paused, resumed, and eventually fractured under the strain. Trust eroded beyond repair. A new chapter began with a different group. The opportunity felt like rescue. Velvet Revolver offered structure, camaraderie, and renewed relevance. Early success suggested redemption. The voice held. The stage welcomed him again. But addiction did not respect new beginnings. The cycle repeated with familiar speed. Unreliability returned. Tension rose. History echoed. Dismissal followed. Another band lost. Another chance closed. The narrative hardened. Talent without stability. Genius without endurance. Arrests continued at lower volume but steady frequency. Short custody periods interrupted momentum again and again. Each interruption shortened patience around him. Attempts at solo work surfaced. Performances varied widely. Some nights delivered brilliance. Others revealed struggle. Audiences learned to brace for inconsistency. The promise remained visible. Fulfillment did not. Health declined quietly. Years of substance use exacted a toll. The body weakened even when the voice tried to hold. Friends worried. Fans hoped. The cycle did not break. Death arrived suddenly and predictably at the same time. Found unresponsive on a tour bus, the cause linked to substances that had haunted him for decades. The shock was immediate. The explanation felt tragically familiar. The end matched the pattern. Scott Weiland left behind songs that still breathe. His voice remains unmistakable. His story stands as a study in how addiction can coexist with brilliance while slowly dismantling everything around it. Not through one catastrophe, but through erosion. The law intervened repeatedly. Treatment was offered. Chances were extended. None of it could outpace the grip of dependency. The tragedy lies not in lack of help, but in the limits of intervention when illness refuses surrender. Whether his art was sharpened or stolen by addiction remains a debate that never settles cleanly. And as this chapter closes, the next story turns to an artist whose battles with substance and the justice system were louder, longer, and impossible to ignore. Part 8, DMX. DMX projected intensity as truth. His voice sounded torn open, raw, and unfiltered. He barked, prayed, confessed, and threatened within the same breath. Faith and fury collided in his music without apology. Crowds felt both uplifted and unsettled. He did not perform toughness. He lived inside it, and listeners believed him because the pain felt real. That pain began early. Childhood offered instability, neglect, and survival instincts learned too young. Exposure to crack arrived before adulthood and rewired expectation. What started as a mistake hardened into routine. Addiction settled in before identity had fully formed. From that point forward, every achievement carried a shadow that never left. Success arrived with unprecedented force. Album after album reached the top. His voice dominated radio, clubs, and soundtracks. Few artists had ever achieved that level of consistency so quickly. Fame amplified everything he carried inside. Money flowed. Access expanded. Pressure intensified. The addiction did not retreat. It scaled up. Arrests began almost immediately and never truly stopped. Charges varied, but the thread was constant. Substance use fueled poor decisions. Probation followed custody. Violations followed probation. Warrants followed violations. Freedom became temporary. The justice system learned his pattern and adjusted accordingly. Driving incidents, possession cases, disorderly conduct, and related offenses stacked into a long record. Some arrests ended quickly. Others escalated. Each one interrupted tours, filming, and recording. The business adapted. Schedules changed. Opportunities shrank. Reliability became the issue no one could ignore. Probation terms tightened. Compliance required sobriety, structure, and restraint. Addiction resisted all three. Missed tests led to detention. Detention led to release. Release led to relapse. The cycle repeated with exhausting predictability. Judges expressed frustration and restraint in equal measure. State custody periods turned into federal involvement when financial crimes surfaced. Tax violations linked to years of unmanaged income and lifestyle choices moved the case into a different arena. The court examined not persona, but paperwork. The sentence reflected accumulated consequence rather than a single act. Federal prison followed. Inside, moments of clarity appeared. He spoke openly about regret, faith, and responsibility. Music played in courtrooms. Tears followed. Promises were sincere. The system acknowledged trauma without excusing harm. Time was served. Release came again. Freedom never lasted long. Relapse followed quickly. Another violation. Another mandate. Treatment programs cycled in and out. Interviews oscillated between hope and resignation. Fans listened with compassion and fear. Everyone had heard the vows before. What separated DMX from others was honesty without resolution. He never pretended the battle was over. He described addiction as a daily fight he often lost. The transparency built connection but did not build safety. The danger remained present. Health deteriorated quietly beneath public chaos. Years of use stressed the body beyond repair. The heart weakened. The margin for error disappeared. When the end came, it followed a familiar pattern. A medical crisis linked to substance use closed the loop. The aftermath revealed how many lives he touched. Tributes focused on vulnerability, faith, and impact. The music endured. The struggle defined the story alongside it. He left behind a catalog that carried confession as much as aggression. DMX showed how addiction can coexist with extraordinary success while steadily dismantling stability. The justice system intervened repeatedly. Compassion appeared alongside punishment. Neither proved sufficient to end the cycle. His life illustrates the limits of talent as protection. Fame accelerated exposure but did not deliver escape. The pattern consumed time, trust, and health until nothing remained to bargain with. Whether repeated chances were hope or delay is a question listeners continue to debate, and the answer often reflects personal belief more than evidence. And as this chapter closes, the next story turns to a pioneer whose influence shaped rock itself while addiction slowly narrowed his world. Part 9, Ike Turner. Ike Turner stood at the beginning of modern American music. Before the genre had a name, he shaped its bones. Rhythm, amplification, distortion, arrangement, and drive came together under his hand. He understood structure instinctively and demanded precision. Bands followed his lead because the results were undeniable. Rock and roll did not arrive fully formed. It was assembled by figures like him, often far from the spotlight. Control defined his world. In music, that control produced clarity and force. In private life, it turned dark. Authority extended beyond rehearsal rooms into relationships. The same rigidity that kept bands tight suffocated those closest to him. Accounts of domination and cruelty circulated for years, dismissed by some and feared by others. Success insulated behavior. Power delayed reckoning. Crack cocaine accelerated everything. What had been volatile became erratic. Paranoia replaced calculation. Temper sharpened. Judgment eroded. The drug did not merely weaken discipline. It inverted it. Control became obsession. Suspicion became routine. The home environment grew unstable. Associates described unpredictability that made collaboration impossible. As his musical relevance faded, legal trouble filled the space. Arrests accumulated late in life rather than early. Possession charges appeared repeatedly. Driving incidents followed. Weapons concerns surfaced. Each encounter with law enforcement carried less leniency than the last. Patience wore thin. The pattern was no longer youthful excess. It was persistent refusal to change. Courtrooms replaced studios. Hearings replaced sessions. The defense leaned on legacy and illness. The prosecution emphasized repetition and risk. The judge weighed decades of warnings against ongoing behavior. This time, caution did not win. A real sentence followed, not a suspended one. Prison time was imposed with finality. Incarceration stripped away remaining illusions. There were no tours to return to, no market waiting. The sentence acknowledged that influence could not excuse harm. Release came later, quieter, and with conditions. Sobriety was claimed. Music resurfaced in limited form. Recognition arrived unevenly. The contrast with Tina Turner sharpened the narrative. While he faced decline and confinement, she rose. Stadiums filled. Awards followed. The public witnessed divergence in real time. One legacy expanded. The other contracted. History did not blur the difference. It highlighted it. Attempts to reclaim authorship and credit continued. Autobiographical defenses appeared. Denials were offered. Skepticism met them immediately. The past had been documented too thoroughly. The damage had been witnessed too widely. Reputation did not rebound. Death closed the story without resolution. Toxicology confirmed long-standing habits. The end felt consistent with the arc rather than surprising. Tributes remained divided. Musicians acknowledged innovation. Audiences remembered harm. The split endured. Ike Turner left behind a foundational contribution to sound and a cautionary record of unchecked power. His influence is embedded in records played daily. His personal conduct remains inseparable from his name. The two coexist uneasily. Legacy here is not singular. It fractures. One part demands acknowledgement for creation. Another demands accountability for destruction. Neither cancels the other. Together they define the figure history must hold. Where recognition ends and reckoning begins is a line listeners draw differently, often revealing their own values in the process. And as this chapter closes, the final story turns to a performer whose public image felt playful while addiction kept pulling him back behind bars. Part 10, Flavor Flav. Flavor Flav built his identity on laughter and chaos that felt harmless. Oversized clocks swung across his chest. Sunglasses hid nothing. Catchphrases landed before punches. He was the wild card beside seriousness, the comic spark inside a revolutionary group. Audiences trusted him because he seemed unserious, playful, almost childlike. The persona softened sharp politics and made rebellion approachable. Behind the clock, addiction never left. Crack cocaine lived off-stage and off-camera, shaping decisions long before consequences arrived. What the audience read as spontaneity often masked instability. What looked like mischief hid compulsion. The clock symbolized urgency in public. Privately, time disappeared. Trouble followed early and often. Arguments at home escalated into police calls. Weapons entered the picture during moments of paranoia and fear. Courts intervened. Probation replaced custody. Conditions were set clearly. Sobriety tests. Curfews. Compliance requirements. None lasted long. Violations stacked without drama. Missed check-ins. Failed tests. New charges linked to old habits. Each breach brought brief confinement. Release followed quickly. The pattern repeated with numbing regularity. Jail time arrived in fragments rather than chapters. Weeks here. Days there. The interruptions carved his life into pieces. Public enemy distanced itself periodically, not from talent but from risk. Trust eroded. Opportunities narrowed. The music world adjusted around unpredictability. He remained famous. He remained unstable. Both truths ran in parallel. Then reality television reframed him entirely. Cameras loved the character. The nation laughed again. Dating shows turned eccentricity into spectacle. A new audience discovered him without context. Popularity surged. Income returned. The image reset. Addiction did not care. Off-camera behavior continued. Legal trouble followed fame into this new phase. Driving incidents. Domestic disputes. Probation violations resurfaced. The contrast grew sharper. The men adored on screen faced restraint off screen. Love did not translate into safety. Judges responded with patience that thinned over time. Sentences remained short but persistent. The goal shifted from punishment to interruption. The system tried to slow a spiral rather than end it. Each release offered another chance. Each relapse confirmed limits. What defined his story was not a single violent act or long sentence, but accumulation. Small consequences added up to a life repeatedly paused. Careers restart when time aligns. His time kept breaking apart. Fans debated separation of character and conduct. Some defended him as harmless. Others pointed to records that told a different story. Both views existed because the public image never matched the private pattern. The clock kept swinging between comedy and confinement. Age did not resolve the conflict. Love from audiences did not erase dependency. Sobriety appeared briefly, then vanished. The cycle endured. The persona survived longer than the men behind it. Flavor Flav became proof that charm can delay judgment but cannot cancel consequence. Cultural impact coexisted with personal collapse. The system never delivered a final ending, only repeated reminders. His life reads like a warning wrapped in laughter. Addiction does not require villainy to destroy. It only requires time and repetition. The bars did not define him. They interrupted him again and again. Whether the public enabled the cycle by laughing too long is a question worth wrestling with, and different answers reveal different beliefs about responsibility. And if this final story leaves you unsettled, it is because every chapter before it points back to the same uncomfortable truth about fame, addiction, and consequence.